By several accounts, Josephine Dixon was a clumsy woman. It seemed like every day she was stubbing her toe on the furniture, cutting her finger in the kitchen, or walking into a wall. This was a problem not just for Josephine, but for her husband, Earl, who loved her deeply. However, it was the 1930s and medical care was expensive. Well, one day, poor Josephine suffered a paper cut while addressing an envelope. She went to her husband, Earl, for help. Taking a band of adhesive tape, Earl placed a small piece of gauze in the middle of it and wrapped it over her wound. Josephine went to bed that night apologizing once again to Earl for being so clumsy and accident-prone, and she vowed to do better the next day. Well, when the next day came, Earl was happy to see that his homemade bandage had fared pretty well overnight. So he made a few more of them, and he took them to work, where he was employed as a lowly cotton buyer for a company called the Johnson & Johnson Company. Showing it to his bosses, Earl's invention was well received. Johnson & Johnson sterilized and packaged it, called it the Band-Aid, which came out in 1939, just in time for World War II. Later, Josephine remembered with great gratitude that fateful night when she fell asleep wearing that first prototype of the Band-Aid. And she said, I felt like such a fool because of my clumsiness. But I guess if it hadn't been for that, we wouldn't have a Band-Aid. Now, the story comes to mind as you and I celebrate this great Feast of All Saints' Day. It's this iconic day of mystery, of wonder, as we ponder where these folks are, how we may join them one day, and what God's plan is for this old world we live in. And as we look at the wonderful men and women of God, as we ponder today every candle lit here for one of our saints, you and I wonder, does they have anything to teach us? Well, in my sermon today, I'd like to suggest that from their point of view at this moment, these saints, as our post-communion prelude says, are engaged in a point of life that does not change, that changes but does not end. That's as Christians how we look at these things. Perhaps they have something to say to you and me this morning. For they know how hectic and fast-moving and unpredictable your life is and my life is. And from their particular point of view, from their unique angle, I like to think that they're now able to tell you and me a few things about how to live. To look at the past with gratitude, to look at the present with compassion, to look at the future with faith. The past with gratitude, thanking God, not cursing God, if not for the past, but that we made it through the past, and that it has made us who we are today. Let's think about that the next time we put on a Band-Aid. To look at the present with compassion, both for ourselves and for other people. And to look to the future and to look at the future with faith, believing that God will care for us as God has promised. And I like to think that Josephine Dixon exemplifies to you and me that first step, and how we are to look at the past with gratitude. Certainly, no one initially looks at harm, even if it's just a paper cut, with any sort of fondness. But many of us have stories on this, about that bad first date with the person we later married, about that horrible first interview and then it turned into the job we later got and loved. Over and over again, it seems that important things that shaped us, that were really hard to understand and accept at the time, are the very things that have made a positive impact on you and me. Dag Hammarskjöld, some of you have heard of him, the famous Swedish economist and diplomat. He famously suggested that our prayer to God for the past should always be thanks. Richard Briggs is a California highway patrolman, and he has single-handedly talked hundreds of people out of committing suicide on the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. Briggs was unaware of that aspect of the job when he signed up for that beat, which he walked for 20 years. Quote, "At first, I didn't know how to talk with people who were in such a state," Briggs said. "But with time and training, I guess I got good at it." In 2018, Briggs helped successfully deter 187 people from taking their lives on that 220-foot high-foot span. 31 people confirmed dead that year. Briggs describes his technique for handling jumpers as based on compassion, which literally means coming alongside somebody. So when Briggs approaches a person who's perched on the edge of the bridge in a very fragile state, he does things like remains 15 feet away and draws no further unless invited to do so. Stooping down to talk on the same level as the jumper because the edge of the Gold Gate Bridge is 3 feet below the roadway. He mimics the dress of the jumper. If they don't have a hat on, if they don't have a coat on, he takes his off. No matter what the weather, it can be chilly there. Introducing himself informally as Richard is something he always does, not authoritatively as Officer Richard Briggs. And finally, listening to the jumper and allowing them to dictate the conversation. Sounds a lot like how Jesus deals with you and me. Compassion. By doing this, by embodying compassion, Officer Richard Briggs says he's able to talk most people off the ledge. When we embody compassion, we are able to talk most people, including ourselves, off the ledge. Showing compassion for ourselves, talking more kindly to ourselves, being more mindful of the needs and concerns of others, that's integral to saintly life. It's what so many of these saints and the saints of even greater reputation show you and me. Look at the past with gratitude, look at the present with compassion, and look at the future with faith, believing that God will care for us as God has promised to do. Have you ever passed one of those huge semis on the freeway that resemble like a shipping container? Well, actually, many times they are, aren't they? Hundreds of thousands of these containers regularly cross the ocean, end up in our ports and on our trucks and in our stores so we can buy things we need and sometimes things we don't need. Everybody here knows that. But what we may not know is that every year from 2,500 to 10,000 of these containers actually fall off ships and end up in the ocean. Seems like a staggering number, doesn't it? 10,000 of these falling off ships. But it's apparently a drop in the bucket compared to the other shipping containers that successfully make the voyage, which is why these lost containers are never retrieved. This means the customers awaiting these goods just wait another month for the next container and life goes on. However, there's one exception. One container I'd like to tell you about that fell off a ship in the mid-1990s and soon after had a lot of people working very hard to track it down. What's curious about this is that this huge container wasn't filled with Rolex watches, with Steuben crystal, with gold bullion, or even Julie Wagner's script cards. It was filled with 28,000 bathtub toys. That's right, rubber duckies, squeaking frogs, squirting zebras. Apparently, when this container fell off the ship, it ruptured, and all of these floaties, 28,000 of them, popped up in the middle of the ocean. At first, they all huddled together, and they began floating, and they were sighted, and somebody wrote an article about them in the paper, and that caught the eye of a famous scientist, a very famous scientist, who had made his living theorizing the speed and strength of ocean currents. He had to use weather and oceanic measuring devices at various intervals to come up with this theories. And although widely used, his theories had never been tested. Why? How could they? But after the scientist read the article about this accidental spill of 28,000 bath toys, a light bulb went off. And finally, he had the perfect petri dish with which to test his theories. The scientist immediately made his way to the scene and he got busy calculating. He then predicted how many toys and how long it would take to get them to Alaska, to Hawaii, to South America, to Europe, to Asia, to Africa. He then alerted authorities in the coastal towns, giving them the exact times and dates in which to look out for rubber duckies washing up on their shores. And the amazing thing about this story, folks, is that this scientist who had theorized for so long and now had concrete data available to him by which to measure his theories had been proven 100% correct. Almost to the day and hour, rubber duckies, squeaking frogs, squirting zebras, they washed up right on schedule, just as the scientist had predicted. And like that scientist, with his correct theories about the currents of ocean life, you and I wonder if Jesus is going to be proven correct in his predictions regarding the currents of our lives. Is Jesus' take on the world correct? Should we be trusting that God will provide? Should we be turning the other cheek? Should we be helping the homeless, donating to our church, making peace with our adversaries, forgiving, encouraging, and speaking well of others, despite how they speak of us? Will all those rubber duckies show up where it's supposed to and when they're supposed to? Friends, to look at the future with faith means, yes, we will trust God to keep God's promises. God will care for us. God will provide for us, and Jesus will accept us however, whenever, and wherever we come. That's what our friend Cassius is doing this morning. Hi, Cassius. He's continues to go through an education on baptism, right, Jan? You're still keeping school in session with Cassius. And I tell you what, Cassius, I've been baptized for decades. I still don't get it. By the book, baptism is defined as full and complete initiation into Christ's church. Practically, Cassius, who was created in love, experiences love every day from his mother Danielle, from his family, and is destined to return to that love as a baptized child of God, is partaking in nothing other than a pinnacle moment of love in his earthly journey. Cassius, in baptism, you're formally accepting God's love for you. You're saying you're sorry for the things you've done wrong. I know it was hard to count those. You had to think about it. And you are agreeing to follow Jesus' way of love by promising to look to the golden rule, loving God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength, loving your neighbor as yourself. Danielle, this is an extraordinary young man that you have raised up here. And thanks for being such a loving mom who, playing off his cue, faithfully brings him to church as he responds to the urgings of his soul. Our souls crave love. It comes in different forms. Churches are by far not the only place you find it. And God is not limited to how that comes. In a perfect world, it's to be found in every church, on every shore. But they're made up of imperfect people. But they know we're Christians by our love. The more we love, the more we can initiate folks like Cassius. God wants all of us to experience perfect love, which is why Jesus came to earth to show us what perfect love looks like. It's healing people. It's reconciling things. It's helping people get love. It's loving people so much they want to kill them. Jesus came to teach us that love is the way, and our gift to the world is to embody that. Cassius, that's how we walk from here. We love people, even when it's hard to do it, and when it hurts. So thanks, Cassius. Thanks, Danielle. Thanks, family. And to this community for helping mold and form this young man. You have been accepting and encouraging and loving and caring. And so this morning, as we honor the saints who have gone before us, we mint a new saint, our beloved Cassius. And may you too model for us gratitude for the past, compassion for the present, and faith for the future. Amen.